Thanks to everybody that's already in the room. We're just going to give it a minute for folks to log into the press conference. Okay. All right, I just want to take a minute to welcome everyone for coming to this press briefing on the Chicago mayoral poll with the Center of the Study for Diversity and Democracy and coalition members. Before we start the press briefing, just a few notes that the webinar will end at approximately 10:30, but the panelists will try to stay longer if the questions run over time. Journalists should use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to submit your questions. Please identify your name and which outlet you are with, and if you have a particular panelist you want to direct your question to, please add that in the Q&A as well. And then after the webinar, a recording of it will be shared out along with a press release to attendees after the session ends. So now I'd like to turn it over to Jaime Dominguez, Associate Professor of Instruction at Northwestern University in the Department of Political Science and a research affiliate with the Center for the Study of Diversity and Democracy.
Thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate it. Welcome everyone to our press release. We're really excited about this poll. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the Center for the Study of Diversity and Democracy, and particularly Al Tillery, the Executive Director. He was been supported throughout the entire process, and also our partners, which I'll introduce in a second. In terms of this poll and the significance of the poll and why did we decide to do this? The reason there's various reasons why we decided to do this and why it's significant. First and foremost, in a lot of polls, and this has been the case in Chicago in the past, Latinos and African Americans are normally either dismissed or they're undersampled, and so their voices are not really represented. And we think that that's very, very important. In this poll, we actually have a robust oversample of Latino and Black voters, so we really get a really good snapshot of actually what these voters are thinking, what these communities are thinking, not just on the candidates, but on a variety of different issues that this campaign or this election is all about. In terms of just the significance of the poll, this idea of this poll came out of the idea that because Latinos and African Americans, for example, are a plurality of the city's population. Secondly, they're a plurality of Chicago City Council. Latinos and Blacks are the majority of Chicago public schools. We thought that it was important that those voices be injected into the conversation leading up to the mayoral election. We feel that their voices count and that they need to be included in this conversation, because outside of this election going forward, they're going to play a very important role in determining not only the composition of the city council, but also determining who the CEO of the city is going to be. And so in order to help to bring these communities to the forefront of this conversation, we decided to partner with organizations, nonprofits, local and nationally, who have worked very closely and continue to work closely with these communities on a variety of different issues ranging from health to education to politics. So because these organizations are, particularly in Chicago, work in all pockets of these communities throughout the city, we thought it was very, very important for us to align ourselves with these organizations, because they will be able to we also represent this community. In terms of the actual poll, I want to talk a little bit about the findings, but first and foremost, I want to just talk quickly just about the methodology of the poll. So the poll includes, this poll was conducted between February 5th and 10th by BSP Research, Barreto and Segura Partners Research. The poll included 643 registered voters in Chicago who were randomly contacted by phone, email, and online voter panels. There was a margin of error of plus or minus 3.9%. It was available in Spanish and English. And respondents who said that they were not planning to vote were excluded from the actual poll. Okay. Lastly, I just want to say that the final data were weighted to match the known census estimates for voters in the city of Chicago. And this is very important because what this actually does is it actually helps us to not only look at these communities or these voters, but actually merge socioeconomic data to these voters. So we have a higher level of confidence and not only predicting, but being able to say this is how these voters think about issue A, et cetera, or issue B, okay? In terms of the findings, there was we found a lot of interesting things, but I just would like to now just take a second to just show you 2 slides that I think capture some of the major findings in the poll. So I'll share my screen in a second. All right. Okay, so first and foremost, in terms of just major findings, a second here. So in terms of the issues, what are the major issues? As in previous polls, our poll shows, in fact, that crime is the #1 issue on the minds of voters. 64% of whites believe that that was the case, 54% of blacks believe that was the case, and a plurality of Latinos, 46% say that that was an issue of priority. There also were some other ones, such as the cost of living, wages, police reform / accountability. Those all fell second, third, and fourth, not necessarily in that order, but those were the issues that the voters have been talking about. Secondly, one thing that we have not seen in previous polls is the conversation around intergroup relations. As I just mentioned a few minutes ago, the fact that Latinos and African Americans make up a plurality of the city on a variety of different fronts. I think it's important to diagnose and to see how these communities see each other. And what we found in this poll is that there's high perceived levels of commonality between Latinos and blacks. So 85% of Latinos thought that there was a high level of commonality. 75% of blacks thought the same thing. Overall, 70% of blacks and Latinos say that the city would be better off if they work together on issues. A third result that we found very interesting is immigrant integration efforts. For those of you who may not know, but Chicago has always historically been a kind of immigrant-friendly destination. It has a welcome city ordinance, and so we wanted to bring this matter up because it's been an issue right now during with Lori Lightfoot and the migrants and refugees that are coming to Chicago and what to do with them, and obviously that can be a contentious issue for some communities. But on that front, we found that 79% of likely voters support city efforts to treat and incorporate refugees / migrants in a humane way. So to me, that was not surprising, but it was good to see that. In terms of candidate choice, where the voters are, in terms of Valles, Congressman Garcia, Lori Lightfoot, et cetera, we found that racial bloc voting is not linear, okay? In fact, 60% of Latinos, 77% of blacks, and 75% of whites have not committed to backing their leading co-ethnic candidate, which essentially the implication is that there's a lot of votes out there to get. And so that will be up to the candidates over these next few weeks to actually put their efforts forward on that. In terms of turnout, obviously that's very, very important in the election. And one thing that was striking with regards to that is that close to 70% of Latinos, that they had the lowest rates of being 100% sure to cast a ballot. Blacks were at 78% and 83% for whites. So what this basically means is that then Latinos, it's important that the campaigns engage this community if they're gonna try to carve out a good chunk of these voters to help support their respective candidate. Oh, sorry. All right. Okay. Let me see if I can get this here. Okay. This last bar graph, basically the takeaway is that, as I said earlier, that the racial bloc voting is not linear. In fact, we see here, if we break it out by whites, blacks, and Latinos in terms of who they're going to support, we see, in fact, that white voters are preferencing at this point Paul Valles. Latinos are preferencing their first choice, Chuy Garcia at 40%. And Blacks are actually, their vote is split. But again, what this basically shows again is that, again, among white voters, Latino voters, and Black voters, a lot of the voters have not yet made up their minds in terms of who they're going to vote for. So I think it's going to be very important over these next couple of weeks to see how these candidates, and in particular their campaigns, position themselves to try to win over these voters. Okay, so I'll start sharing my screen there. So what I'd like to do now is essentially introduce some of the panelists of the organizations that were a big part of this project. And this is just for the Q&A, so if you want to direct your question to one of these individuals, please do so. The first panelist is Roberto Valdez Jr. He is the Midwest Policy Director of the Hispanic Federation. Next, we have Natalie Reyes, who's CEO of the Latino Victory Project. We have Silvia Puente, who's CEO and President of the Latino Policy Forum. And then we also have Patrice James, who's the Executive Director of the Illinois Black Advocacy Initiative in Chicago. So I'll stop there, and if you can, if you have any questions, you can put them in the, as Stephanie said, in the Q&A, and we'll try to answer them as best as we possibly can.
Jaime, we also have Matt.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's right. My buddy and colleague, Matt Barreto, who's a partner of BS Research. They're the ones that conducted the poll. So if you have any questions about the actual poll, the methodology, Professor Barreto is here to answer those questions.
So Jaime, while we're waiting for questions to tee up, I'm wondering if you might, in your slides, you didn't summarize the overall findings of where the Chicago electorate is leaning, which from my estimation is sort of lining up with what we're seeing with all the other polling. Obviously, so I was wondering if you could share that information. And obviously what distinguishes our poll is that we have the much more detailed information on how Black and Latino voters are potentially going to vote.
Yeah, so on that chart that I showed, so it's actually, this is actually surprising here. So 60% of Latinos have not yet made up their mind, right? So only 40% are actually saying they're going to vote for Chuy Garcia, but there's still, again, a majority that still has not made up their decision yet. But again, this just shows again also that, right, that Latinos also are not a monolith, right? There is very stratified population, it's very heterogeneous, and they will vote based on their immediate and long-term interests. 77% of Blacks have not decided, right, are kind of undecided in terms of who they're going to support, right? So, and then amongst whites, 75% of whites have said that they're not sure yet who they're going to vote for. There was a swath on that chart that said, you know, some voters were, obviously, most of them were preferencing ballots, but about 11% said they were willing to cast their ballot for Congressman Garcia, or they would cast their ballot for Lori Lightfoot. So essentially, again, this expectation that because Chicago is officially kind of an official tripart city of Blacks, whites, and Latinos, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to align themselves or support, right, their kind of co-ethnic candidate. I know people may think that and expect that. We did see a little bit of that, but again, it's a small share of those voters who plan to come out on election day.
But Jaime, overall, what percentage of the voters said that they were voting for each of the candidates?
Yeah, I can give those, Sylvia. I have those. Thank you, Professor Dominguez, for that overview. It was great working with this team. Happy to answer any methodological questions. I know we're going to hear from each of the other panelists here with their overviews, but in the overall total combined vote, which was weighted proportionately to the city of Chicago voters, we had Paul Vallis at 19% citywide, Chuy Garcia at 17% citywide, Lori Lightfoot at 14% citywide, Willie Wilson at 12% citywide, Brandon Johnson at 9% citywide, Jamal Green 6%, Sophia King 5%, Cam Buckner 4%, and Roderick Sawyer 3%, with 12% completely undecided. That was after we asked people who they plan to vote for. Anyone who said they were undecided out of the gates, we asked them who were they leaning towards. And those are the results that we presented there, consistent with other pollsters. So that gives you a sense of the overall city, what the overall city looks like. A very close race between those top three candidates: Vallis, 19%, Garcia, 17%, Lightfoot, 14%. And Roberto, I saw he had his hand up. I don't know if each of the panelists wanted to make some comments before there was any other questions. So.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Professor Dominguez. Wanted to elevate the point around the 69% of the Latinos who said they weren't certain if they were going to vote. The Hispanic Federation does think that's obviously very, very important, as candidates and organizations are doing their outreach to ensure that the outreach is culturally relevant to the Latino community in Chicago. We believe that will encourage voter turnout. And that is why we're embarking actually in the next couple of weeks on a Get Out to Vote campaign that's going to be focused on the Southwest side and the Northwest side of Chicago. We're going to partner with local community organizations to ensure that they're getting out to these neighborhoods and to folks. And so just wanted to elevate that and ensure that reporters on the call understand that, again, with candidates and organizations, culturally competent and relevant outreach efforts are needed.
I'm wondering if we could also just share a little bit with the voters who said that they have been contacted by one of the campaigns. I mean, those of us that pay attention to this feel overwhelmed, I'm sure, with all of the media, but I think it was a little surprising to me to see, encouraging and surprising to see both the number of candidates, the voters who had heard from one of the candidates, but also the large number who had not yet heard from a candidate.
We had in the data, we asked people, has anyone from a Chicago mayoral campaign or any other local organization contacted you and asked you to vote, either by phone, text, email, or maybe in person? And I think a lot of us know during campaign season, you get a lot of text messages, not quite as many knocks on the door, although that's returning. Overall, citywide, 52% of voters said that they had been contacted. I think, as Sylvia noted, that's an encouraging sign. That means that these campaigns are very robust, that they're out there talking to people. It is likely the case that most of that contact is coming from text messages where, our phones are on different lists and we're hearing from those. We also found that Latino voters had slightly higher rates of reporting that someone had contacted them. And so the question will be whether or not, I think, as Roberto just mentioned, the question will be whether or not that contact is robust, is it meaningful, and does it translate into voter turnout? Because typically we have seen in first round elections slightly lower voter turnout, even when there is that outreach.
Yeah, and just a reminder that voting is on its way. People are voting right now in Chicago, and so important to be informed by this poll. And obviously looking at Black and Latino voters, like what are the commonalities and what's getting people out there to vote? 57% shows that crime, is critically important, an issue that is resonating in Chicago. Inflation, cost of living, just being able to pay for milk and eggs, 44%, and wages and jobs, 25%. So really, I think that this is a really important poll that will help, candidates also in messaging, to folks and meeting Latinos and Black folks and communities of color throughout Chicago where they're at on issues that are relevant. So really want to thank both Matt and Jaime for a great poll and this great coalition that work really well together in ensuring that, we are talking to our voters day in and day out.
I also wanted to lift up and just build on what Matt shared in terms of candidates and campaigns reaching out to voters. It was still a little bit surprising that 54% of Black voters had not been contacted by a campaign. And I think that, history has shown us that oftentimes the Black vote is taken for granted. So, just because there is a field of Black candidates and that Chicago has a Black mayor, these campaigns should not take the Black vote for granted. And we know what the Black vote means. And we know that we are a important and powerful voting bloc, and we should not be taken for granted. And this poll is showing a bit that voters that the campaigns have some work to do, and that they should actually do some work to engage Black voters and make sure that that their messaging can reach the Black voters, and that they are focusing on topics and issues that are important to Black voters. Crime has come up as a top issue, which is unsurprising, and I think it's would probably be it'd be a top issue nationally as well. But I think what is important in this poll is that this poll says, yes, we are concerned about crime, but we are also concerned about the root causes of crime, which we know are things that are tied to people's quality of life. So people are not just looking for policing type solutions, they are looking for stronger schools, accessible public transportation, accessible and affordable housing. Folks are looking for alternatives to the traditional crime and order rhetoric to actually achieve safety in Chicago that many voters are focused on and prioritizing.
And to build on Patrice's point, what I found encouraging, but some I know would find challenging, is we also asked a question on, are you willing to pay for increased services to address crime, to address schools, to address the migrant crisis? And my recollection is that the overwhelming majority of voters said yes. So maybe Matt or Jaime, you can give the detail on that response.
Matt, do you have that?
Sorry, I was stuck trying to get unmute. So there was a couple of different questions on the survey about that. One was specific, one was very specific that some candidates have talked about, which talked about taxing multi-million-dollar properties to help pay for more city services. That overall had over 80% support among voters across every racial and ethnic group. Then we had a specific question that Sylvia mentioned. Generally speaking, do you prefer to pay more in taxes and have a city government that provides more services, or pay less in taxes and decrease city services? 59% of all voters in Chicago said they prefer to pay more in taxes in order to have more government services, compared to 41% who said they wanted less taxes and decreased services. That was strongest among Black and Latino respondents in the poll, who were slightly more likely to prefer a government that provided more services, even if they had to pay more in taxes. And so I think to Sylvia's point, there is a desire among voters in the city to see an active, I hesitate to use the word big because that's not what voters are looking for, but active and effective city government, even if it means that a little bit more taxes might need to come, that it would benefit the city overall. There's multiple, as you dive through the results, multiple policy questions and policy issues that would seem to suggest that.
I saw that there was a comment that probably Stephanie might have been able to read, to see if we can give a short summary in Spanish. Jaime or Matt, I don't know if either one of you can do that.
I can start. Is it in Spanish here? Am I saying it? Is that so? Okay, so I can try and say it. So la importancia de esta encuesta es que demuestra que los votantes están involucrados, quieren estar enganchados en esta campaña. Lo que vemos también es que el crimen es la prioridad número uno de los votantes, con blancos, con afroamericanos y también latinos. También es importante de que latinos y afroamericanos también están dispuestos a pagar más impuestos para más recursos en áreas de salud, de educación. Entonces, la idea de que, que no hay que el concilio de Chicago que no quieren aprobar quizás legislación que puede aumentar los impuestos para la comunidad, no es verdad. Entonces, de esas campañas sobre las siguientes 2 semanas tienen mucho trabajo que hacer. Y también, especialmente el Congressman García, de que automáticamente los latinos van a votar para él porque es latino, no necesariamente va a ocurrir eso. Entonces, sus campañas y los otros también candidatos tienen que poner sus esfuerzos enfrente y ingresar en recursos para quizás atraer esos votantes a la campaña de ellos.
Yo soy José Marco Paredes, el director de participación cívica del Latino Policy Forum. Quería añadir a lo que decía Jaime que efectivamente este resultado, esto de lo que hablaba Jaime, es muy importante y es muy significativo, porque lo que hemos visto es que cuando vemos que la mayoría de latinos tampoco tiene claro si al final va a acabar votando al representante, al congresista García, esto nos dice que la gente estamos superando un poco estas votaciones desde la época de Harold Washington un poco más racializadas, en las que los votantes realmente votaban a candidatos con los que compartían cuál era su raza y su etnia. Da la sensación de que vamos superando un poco esa situación y realmente es bastante consistente con las distintas encuestas que hemos visto en los distintos medios. Tenemos que entender cuál es el motivo de este cambio, aún no lo sabemos, pero desde luego los candidatos tienen todavía mucho que hacer a la hora de tratar de convencer a los votantes latinos. Realmente hablar sobre esos asuntos que les interesan, que como vemos superan un poco los tradicionales motivos de inmigración, sino que le interesan igual como a otros grupos, cuestiones sobre el crimen, economía, la mejora de nuestras escuelas. Tienen que hacer todos los candidatos un esfuerzo por intentar apelar al voto de los latinos y que veamos un incremento, ¿no?, de su participación en estas próximas elecciones.
I'd just like to make a quick kind of overall point, though, of what everybody has said already. One thing that's clear in terms of a major takeaway for me is the fact that it's clear that Latino and Black voters are not a monolith, right? In fact, I would argue that this poll shows, in fact, that they are more of a heterogeneous mosaic, whose policy preferences and policy choices, right, are all are wide-ranging and can be on all fronts of the spectrum. So I think if anything to take away from this poll is the fact that this idea that they're going to be just kind of linear voters and they're just going to behave a certain way is not necessarily true. And more importantly, it shows that, in fact, Latinos and Black voters do have a commitment to ensure that this city continues to, from a governance standpoint, continue to respond to their citizens, that they are engaged with their citizens, and that their votes are not taken for granted. And so also, I think this is a great opportunity also for coalition politics to emerge in a unique way, where you can see, you know, multi-racial, multi-ethnic alliances across the board on a variety of different policy fronts that this poll actually speaks to. So just wanted to say that for me, that was very, very significant.
So Jaime, I think, does that close us out? If there are no other questions in the chat. Stephanie, do we have other questions in the chat?
just want to make sure we answered the question from Jose Rico about, well, I think we did, the specific issues in the poll Black and brown people strongly agree on and strongly disagree on.
I'll just add one note to that we did ask a specific question about Black and Latino coalition politics. In fact, we asked 2 or 3 different questions about it. But we asked to Black and Latino voters, would your community be better if Blacks and Latinos worked more closely in partnership? Or is it better for Black and Latino communities to each focus on their own issues? Overwhelmingly, we had 71% of Black voters say it is better for Blacks and Latinos to work together, and 78% of Latino voters to say it is better for Chicago for Blacks and Latinos to work together. We saw other questions about whether or not you think Latinos and Blacks have a lot in common when it comes to politics in Chicago, or if they're very different communities. Same results when we asked Blacks and Latinos about their commonality. 75% of Black and Latino voters felt that they had a great deal or a fair amount in common. And so we see a lot of signs, even though sometimes there are different candidate preferences on the issues. And when we specifically ask, how important is it for communities to work together? This was one of the places where I have seen as a pollster some of the highest rates of desire for coalition. And so that was a very interesting and important finding.
And I just also want to make sure we answer the question from Danielle Moran. Do we have numbers assessing Mayor Lightfoot's approval rating on different criteria and across different demographics?
We do have candidate favorability. I think that now Stephanie has shared out the link to the full results where you can see everything. We do have candidate favorability questions in there. And so you can see different ratings of all the 9 candidates who are running for mayor, familiarity and favorability.
Okay, that looks like everything in the chat.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming. This is a very informative session. I think that we did due diligence in terms of putting out this poll that I think reflects very well what these two communities are thinking on a variety of different fronts, whether it's candidate, whether it's policy issues leading up to the mayoral election. There's a lot of work to be done. And I hope that this information is well received and that it gives the candidates an opportunity to really put their efforts forward to try to win over Blacks, white, and Latino voters. Thank you for coming, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.